All right, welcome to today's verdict. We have our first guest today, very special, Andrew Yang, candidate for mayor. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, David. Congratulations on the awesome work you do for the people in the Bronx.
We really appreciate that. And Andrew, the first thing I did when I knew you were coming on is I took a look at your commercial, which announced your candidacy. I very much enjoyed it, especially that part where you're at the 161st Street subway station, Yankee Stadium, which happens to be my station and where my clients are in the South Bronx. And a lot of them are hurting. They're hurting financially. They were hurting financially before the pandemic, and now it's even worse. What would you say to them? What could you do for them if you were mayor?
We have to do so much, David. I've got a series of plans that I think are going to help get businesses and restaurants back on their feet, get individual families back on their feet. I've pledged $1 billion in economic relief to struggling New Yorkers a year during my term. And that sounds like a very big commitment, but we can do it. We have the resources. Just this week, I announced a People's Bank of New York that'll put $100 million into community development financial institutions and microloans that will get to families and entrepreneurs right there in the Bronx, businesses that are trying to get their doors open. We have to do much, much more for the people who are struggling. And one thing I'm very proud of is I think we're going to get some help from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the administration, in part because we now got them the Senate. Chuck Schumer is the majority leader. It's a whole new world in D.C. And I think Chuck Schumer is an incredible upgrade for New York over Mitch McConnell.
You know, the city, I would consider it broken at this point. And it's a big task that you would have if you were elected. When you talk about the crime that's been happening, so, you know, I had just mentioned the subways, some of the things that have been happening in the subway stations, the disrepair. What are your thoughts? How do you give New Yorkers the confidence that they need with respect to what's happening in the city?
It's a tragic, terrible time for so many New Yorkers, David. The pain is everywhere. We're missing 700,000 jobs, which has driven so many people into distress. And then they don't feel like there's hope. They look at someone else's like belongings, and start thinking maybe there's something that I can do that's not great, but in a better time, they would have completely never have had that thought. So we have to try and make sure that people feel like their subway stations are safe, that their streets are safe. We need to have police visible near subway stations so that folks have that sense of security and they can be there if there is a problem. But a lot of it revolves around getting the vaccine out to people, getting small businesses to a point where the storefronts are open, not closed. And the vaccination process has been deeply frustrating for so many New Yorkers. We can see it has not been equitable, that communities of color have already been represented at far too low a level of the people that have gotten the vaccine. We have to change that as quickly as possible.
You know, also, with respect to the disproportionate, there's a homeless issue throughout New York. We've always had issues with that, but more so than ever. On the sidewalks, many times, they've been displaced. What can we do? Because many people are suffering, and they're suffering on our streets. And I think that's a big question, especially in the Bronx. I see it more often than anywhere else. What are your thoughts on that?
Street homelessness is something we can address, David. We can invest in safe haven beds, in supportive housing, in mental health resources and substance abuse resources, and frankly, more assertive interventions, trying to get someone off the streets into a better environment. This is something that all New Yorkers are for, because we know that this person who's on the street often needs help. And it also is unsettling just to see people on the street suffering in that way. It gives you a sense of uncertainty yourself. So I'm so excited to say that we can solve this problem. This is a solvable problem, and it's going to help everyone, from the people who are struggling to the business owners who are trying to restore like a thriving sidewalk.
I mean, and I'm wondering whether the homeless problem goes hand in hand with the pandemic. Maybe they're not getting as much treatment. They're refusing to go into certain facilities. Some facilities aren't taking them in. Maybe once we get the pandemic under control, we can maybe get a little bit more control of the homeless issue.
Well, there's a series of interlocking problems where street homelessness is concerned. Number one, is that a lot of the folks on the streets do not want to go into a shelter because they might have had a negative experience with overcrowding or other problems. So we need to have other environments to bring them to that they will go to more willingly in terms of safe haven beds and supportive housing. Supportive housing has been very successful. And right now we haven't been able to expand supportive housing as quickly as we'd like, in part because the city and the state can't get on the same page. So if we can address that and bolster the mental health resources and have a policy where if someone frankly is in a borderline situation in terms of accepting help, where we can actually get them to a mental health facility or some place where they can start getting the support they need, we can solve this problem. We just haven't been assertive enough in many of these cases in terms of getting them the help they need.
Now, speaking of housing, we're having a little bit of an issue in the city, both from tenants who can't afford to pay their rents and landlords who are not getting monies, and they have their own issues to deal with, whether it's real estate taxes, Con Edison. That's going to be a difficult situation to solve. Where do you stand on that in terms of helping, both sides, tenants and landlords?
Yeah, and the landlords, it's true. I think we need to extend the eviction moratorium that's been going on through the pandemic. People should not be losing their homes during this time. Like if you lose your home during this time, it's catastrophic, both on an individual and family level, but on a community level and the city level. So we should be extending the moratorium. We should have free counsel for any tenant that wants to be represented, because that's been shown to keep people in their homes. We need to extend these tenant assistance programs. To me, the simplest solution truly is to keep someone in a stable situation and make sure that they don't wind up in an environment that's going to be much more costly for both them and the city.
I completely agree. I'm going to shift gears for a second. I know your wife is from Queens. I'm born and bred Queens Village, public school systems the whole way, kindergarten through Martin Van Buren High School. Big fan of the public schools. A lot of people are not too happy with the virtual learning, that's for sure. So the question is, what can we possibly do to give people the confidence they need in our public school system?
Well, I'm a public school parent myself, along with my wife, Evelyn, who grew up in Queens. And I'm frustrated. The data shows that online school is 30 to 70% worse than in-person school. And we can all sense that's true. We all know it's not as good as being in the building. And then the data also shows that 29% of New Yorkers don't have high-speed internet at home, which would make it very, very hard for their child to go to school online. And unfortunately, we know that 29% is disproportionately represented in communities of color, in the Bronx. So we need to attack this problem at multiple levels. We need to reopen schools for young kids and at-risk kids as quickly as possible. And the data also shows that little children are not spreaders of the coronavirus in any significant measure. So this has to be job one. We should be fighting harder to get our schools open for young at-risk children, and getting our kids back in position to learn, because we can't have them losing a year in this way. We're going to have to do everything we can to make it up.
I threw out, sometimes I throw out some possible questions to people who want to, get some things out. I have one from a particular teacher, actually, in terms of schools. It's not necessarily related to teaching, but it has to do with her ethnicity. She is Asian American. Her question, her name is Annie. She's a teacher in New York City. Her question is, with the increase in hate crimes toward Asian Americans in our community, what is your plan to combat the violent racism we are facing?
Oh, Annie, thank you so much for the question. I'm the son of immigrants myself. I would be very proud to be the first mayor of Asian American descent. The hatred and racism that's rising towards Asian Americans is heartbreaking and devastating. I'm actually co-hosting a town hall on this subject with Jumaane Williams this weekend to see if we can help people understand what our community is going through. So there are a number of things we need to do. Number one, we have to treat these incidents as hate crimes and have law enforcement pursue these actions to the fullest extent of the law. There's an incident in Queens just this week, and the individual involved was apprehended, and he should be prosecuted as someone who committed a hate crime. And then we need to dedicate more resources to the Asian American community so that people actually will feel comfortable reporting incidents. That particular incident was caught on film, but there are many things that are happening that we will never hear about, and we need to have more trust between the Asian American community and law enforcement so that we can address this problem more fully?
Well, law enforcement is really a sticky issue here. Certainly now, with what's been going on during the summer, there's been issues about defunding the police, but not necessarily defunding, but for movement of funds from the New York City Police Department, maybe to the schools or different places. What are your thoughts on police involvement in terms of funding? It's tough. It's a tough issue.
Well, we have to do multiple things at once. And I think most New Yorkers would agree that we have underinvested in our communities in different ways, and that there are many incidents that would benefit from having a mental health counselor, a substance abuse worker, or a violence interrupter, as opposed to an armed police officer. An armed police officer is not the ideal person if you're having a mental health breakdown or some issue. So I think most people agree that we need to increase our investment in different types of resources and education and health for various communities. I think most people also agree that if you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on settlements of civil lawsuits against police officers every year, that is an awful use of city resources. There are literally a million better things we could be doing with money than settling these lawsuits. So we need to reform the culture of the police department in different ways. One thing that I've suggested that now people are really excited about, new officers should live in the city. We require that for employees of other city agencies. Certainly for a police officer, living in the city would give them a better understanding of the community that they're serving and protecting. So there are things that we can do to improve matters. But at the same time, we're going to need police officers to help stem frankly, the rising rates of violent crime that are going on in the city. And another form of police accountability is to try and get the resolution rates, which is whether you've apprehended the perpetrator, going up, not down. Because right now, violent crime is going up and the resolution rates are going down, and that is a terrible combination. So that's another form of police accountability.
Well, Andrew, before I let you go, I'd be remiss if I didn't discuss Knicks and Nets with you. I know you made it seem like you gave up on the Knicks. I know you haven't given up on the Knicks. Nets had a great game last night. Nets had a great game last night against the Lakers. What do you think? You think we got a chance in this city? Maybe we'll have a basketball team that can win a championship this year while you're mayor.
Well, you would have to say that I think the Nets are one of the favorites to come out of the East. And they went all in. They got James Harden. But you literally have two, maybe even three MVP caliber players. Like, that team could win the title this year. So
it's all about.
You can imagine a parade in New York City as early as as this summer, conceivably. Hopefully, we'll be back in parade mode. Hopefully, by then the vaccine will be out and distributed to so many of us that if we wanted to, we could celebrate a Nets championship. And the Knicks are looking up too. Like, you got to say, Tom Thibodeau has really coached up that team. Julius Randle's having a great season.
I agree. It's all about teamwork. It's not just it's not the individuals. It's working together as a team, and New York City needs to work together as a team. Andrew, I want to thank you very much for coming on. Good luck with the candidacy, and I hope to have you back soon.
Thank you, David. Appreciate you. Great deal.